"Help me," the mermaid whispered in tears, her hand stretched forward. Layla gasped. She trembled in fear, carrying her water pot with a tight grip. The moonlight barely touched the earth as Layla stepped out into the cold morning in tears, carrying her water pot. It was still dark, but her aunt's angry voice cut through the quiet night like a knife. "Layla, get up! You need to fetch water from the river." Layla shivered from the sharpness of her aunt's command. She had barely slept the night before, but that didn't matter to Aunt Amina. Layla had no choice but to get up and do what was asked of her. No one else in the house ever did the chores. It was always Layla. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped into the chill of the night. Her feet touched the dewy grass, the cold biting through her thin sandals. The path to the river was dark and narrow, the trees looming like giants. Layla's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt safe. Ever since her parents died in a farming accident years ago, she had been forced to live with her aunt, who treated her more like a servant than family. The worst part was that Aunt Amina's children, Ali and Zainab, never had to lift a finger. Layla did it all. Tears welled in her eyes, but she wiped them away before they could fall. She hated feeling weak. She hated the loneliness. But tonight would be different. As she walked down the path, something strange tugged at her. A sensation, like the air around her, had shifted. She stopped in her tracks. The wind was eerily still, and the only sound was the soft rustling of the leaves ahead. Then, out of nowhere, a faint voice broke through the silence. "Help me. Please, help me." Layla froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked around, scanning the darkness. Her heart beat faster. The voice sounded so real, but who could it be? Who else was out there in the middle of the night? The sound came again. "Help me." It was a whisper, but Layla heard it clearly. She turned her head slowly, her eyes wide with fear. And there, lying by the riverbank, was something that made her blood run cold. A figure? A person? No, not a person. A mermaid. Layla gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She had heard the stories. The legends that spoke of beautiful, dangerous creatures living beneath the water, but never had she imagined one would be right in front of her. The mermaid's tail shimmered under the pale light of the moon, and her long dark hair spread out like a veil on the wet ground. But something was wrong. The mermaid was trembling, her body bruised. Her arm was outstretched toward Layla, and her lips moved weakly. "Help me," she whispered again. Layla's legs felt like jelly. She should run. She should leave and get back to the safety of her aunt's house. But her feet were frozen in place. Something deep inside her refused to leave the mermaid like this. The mermaid's eyes opened slowly, locking onto Layla's. They were filled with pain, but there was something else too. Fear. Before Layla could react, the faint sound of men's voices filled the air. "The mermaid can't get away," one voice said. "She's wounded. Find her before she escapes." Layla's heart skipped a beat. Men? The mermaid wasn't just hurt, she was being hunted. She looked back at the mermaid, her chest tightening. The creatures in the stories were dangerous, but these men were hunting this one. They couldn't let her get away. They would kill her. Without thinking, Layla ran toward the riverbank, her legs moving before her mind could catch up. She dropped her water pot, her hands shaking as she knelt beside the mermaid. "Hold on," Layla whispered, barely knowing what she was doing. She tried to lift the mermaid, but her body was heavy. The mermaid groaned in pain, her tail flicking weakly. Layla's mind raced. She couldn't just leave her here. She had to help. Hearing the men drawing closer, Layla pushed herself up, wrapping one arm around the mermaid's fragile body. Her heart pounded in her chest, each step feeling like 1,000 miles. She stumbled, but she kept going, knowing the men were right behind her. She wasn't sure how long she had to get away, but she didn't stop running. She ran off the path into the thick bushes, her feet catching on roots and rocks. Finally, she found a large tree with thick branches that could hide them both. She dragged the mermaid behind it and ducked down, praying that the men wouldn't find them. The mermaid's breathing was shallow, and her skin was still ice cold. Layla could hear the men shouting, getting closer, but she dared not move. She pressed herself against the tree, her heart racing. The men's voices grew louder, their torchlights flashing from afar. "She's here somewhere. She can't be far." Layla squeezed her eyes shut. She held her breath, her body tense with fear. The mermaid's groans were soft, but Layla quickly pressed her hand over her mouth, desperate to keep her quiet. If they were discovered, it would be over. "Where is she?" one of the men shouted. "She couldn't have gone far." Layla's pulse raced in her ears. The men were so close. Any second now, they would see her. But then, just as quickly as the men had arrived, they began to move away. Their voices faded, and Layla let out a soft, shaky breath. She looked at the mermaid, whose eyes were closed now, her body still trembling. Layla leaned against the tree, exhausted. "Are you okay?" she whispered. The mermaid's eyes fluttered open. She nodded weakly, but there was a sadness in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you." Layla's heart clenched. She didn't know what to do. What if the men came back? What if they weren't done searching? But the mermaid didn't belong to the men. She didn't deserve to be hunted like an animal. Layla stayed silent for a long time, not knowing what the next step would be. Layla and the mermaid were breathing quietly, hiding behind the tree. The men were still out there, searching for the mermaid. Their voices echoed through, but Layla stayed as still as she could, praying that they wouldn't find her. Suddenly, a loud voice boomed from behind them. "She should be around here. I can feel it." Layla's heart leaped into her throat. She had not expected this. She quickly placed her hand over the mermaid's mouth to stop her from making a sound. Her heart was racing faster than it ever had before. She could hear the men coming closer, their footsteps crunching on the dry leaves. The air around them seemed thick with danger. The mermaid's body was trembling in Layla's arms, her eyes wide with fear. Layla could feel the cold sweat on her forehead as she looked around, desperately searching for a way out. The men were searching the bushes nearby, their voices loud and urgent. She must be close. Keep looking. Layla didn't dare move. If they came any closer, they would see them. The mermaid's groan was barely audible as she shifted in Layla's arms. Layla squeezed her eyes shut, wishing with all her might that the men would go away. But luck was on their side. After a few tense moments, the men seemed to lose interest. One of them shouted, "She's not here. Let's go back to the river quickly. She can't hide for long. We'll surely find her." Their voices slowly faded as they walked deeper into the forest. Layla let out a long, silent breath. Her hands were still shaking as she looked at the mermaid. They were safe, at least for now. The mermaid's eyes met hers, and she gave a weak smile, her face filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered softly. "You saved me." Layla didn't answer. She was too scared to say anything. All she could think about was getting away from the men and getting the mermaid somewhere safe. Layla carefully helped the mermaid up, supporting her as she tried to stand. The mermaid's body was still weak, her tail barely able to move, but she nodded at Layla, signaling she was ready. Without a word, Layla turned and led the mermaid down a narrow path through the bushes, avoiding the main road that led to her house. She had to be careful. She couldn't risk her aunt or anyone else seeing them. Her aunt's children, Ali and Zainab, were always lazy. But her aunt would wake up early, and if she saw the mermaid, they would be in trouble. As they moved through the thick bushes, Layla kept glancing back over her shoulder. Her feet felt heavy, and the cold air nipped at her skin. But she pressed on, determined to keep the mermaid safe. The path was narrow, but it led to a small hidden area behind their house. Layla stopped once they reached the bushes behind the house. She hid behind a tree and peered through the leaves, waiting to see if her aunt had already woken up. The sky was still dark, and the first hints of dawn were just beginning to appear in the sky. She knew that her aunt's children would still be sleeping, but if her aunt was awake, there would be trouble. Layla held her breath, watching carefully. She couldn't afford to make any noise. The last thing she wanted was for her aunt to find out what she was doing. Layla had to make sure everything was clear. After a few minutes of waiting, Layla saw the light in her aunt's room flicker. She was still asleep. Relieved, Layla whispered to the mermaid, "It's safe. We can go now." Carefully, with all her strength, Layla lifted the mermaid once more. The mermaid's body felt heavy, but Layla didn't let that stop her. She had to keep going. She guided the mermaid through the bushes and toward the abandoned hut at the back of her aunt's house. It was an old wooden hut that her aunt had once lived in before she built a new house. It was forgotten and left to rot, but it was the only place Layla could hide the mermaid for now. When they reached the hut, Layla paused. The door creaked as she opened it, but she quickly slipped inside with the mermaid. The inside of the hut was dusty and full of old furniture. The floor was covered in leaves and cobwebs, but it was the safest place she could think of. Layla helped the mermaid onto the floor and gently laid her down. She could see the pain in the mermaid's eyes, the exhaustion from the long night. Layla knelt beside her and whispered, "Are you okay?" The mermaid nodded weakly. I'm better, but I'm still in pain." Layla's heart sank. She knew she had to help the mermaid, but she didn't have the medicine or knowledge to heal her wounds. She felt helpless. What could she do? Then, an idea came to her. There was an old kettle in the kitchen that they used for boiling water. "I'll be back," Layla whispered, standing up quickly. She hurried back to the kitchen, trying to make as little noise as possible. She grabbed the kettle and filled it with water. The heat from the boiling water would at least help with the mermaid's pain. Layla knew she had to be quick. Her aunt could wake up at any moment, and if she found out what Layla was doing, there would be trouble. Layla boiled the water and then rushed back to the hut. The mermaid was still lying there, her breathing steady but shallow. Layla felt a wave of relief that she hadn't been discovered yet. Carefully, Layla poured the hot water into a small bowl, and using a cloth, she gently dabbed the mermaid's wounds with it. The mermaid hissed at first, the warmth stinging her wounds. But she didn't pull away. Layla worked quickly, massaging the mermaid's wounds with gentle hands. "Thank you," the mermaid whispered again, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to repay you." Layla's heart ached as she looked at the mermaid. She had saved her life, but Layla knew she couldn't stay here for long. What if her aunt found them? What if the men came back? Her mind raced with all the possible dangers. She had to protect the mermaid, but she also had to protect herself. She wasn't sure what to do next, but for now, she could only stay hidden and hope that the dangers outside would stay away. Just a few minutes later, a new sound reached her ears. It was the familiar voice of her aunt, Aunt Amina. Layla froze, her heart racing in her chest. She knew that voice all too well, and she knew it wasn't good. Aunt Amina stepped outside of her hut, looking frustrated. She was muttering to herself, her face twisted in anger. Layla left here since 3 amperes. Aunt Amina grumbled, looking down the path toward the river. And she's still not back? I will deal with her today. I'll make sure she drinks all the water in that pot when she gets back here. She's been gone too long. Layla's breath caught in her throat. She could feel her legs shaking as she crouched behind the door, trying to stay as quiet as possible. She dared not move. She had to stay hidden. Her aunt's anger was never gentle. If Aunt Amina found her now, she didn't know what might happen. Aunt Amina, still grumbling under her breath, went to a wooden chair that sat just outside her hut. She picked it up roughly, the wood creaking under her weight, and sat down. She held a cane tightly in her hands. Her eyes narrowed as she stared into the distance, waiting for Layla's return. Layla's eyes widened in fear. Her aunt's anger was terrifying, and the thought of her coming to the hut to check on her was enough to make Layla's heart race. She was trapped. As Layla remained hidden behind the door, she heard Aunt Amina continue to complain loudly to herself. She thinks she can do whatever she wants. No respect. I'll teach her today, Aunt Amina muttered, shaking her head. I can't believe she's not back yet. Layla's nerves were on edge. She dared not move a muscle for fear that her aunt might hear her. She peered through the small crack in the door to see her aunt sitting with a cane, still angry. Layla knew she had to be careful. Every second felt like an eternity. It was then that Layla heard footsteps approaching. Someone was walking toward the house, and Layla's heart skipped a beat. It was Ali, Aunt Amina's son. He had just woken up, and when he saw his mother sitting outside with a cane, he walked over to her. His face was groggy, still half asleep, but he had a look of concern as he approached. Mama, what's going on? Ali asked, rubbing his eyes. Aunt Amina sighed, her face still twisted with frustration. That girl hasn't come back since 3 amperes. I sent her to the river to get water, but she's still not back. I swear she's acting like she's too good for this house. Ali looked at his mother, confused. She's not back yet? No, and I'm sick of it. Maybe it's better if she just goes missing for good. She's a burden on this house, Aunt Amina said, her voice harsh. Ali frowned, but didn't say anything. He turned around and started walking toward the river, wanting to check for himself. He returned a few minutes later, holding Layla's water pot. I didn't see her at the river, he said, his face blank, but I found her water pot lying on the ground. Aunt Amina's face twisted in anger once more as she stood up. She's probably off somewhere with that boy from the village. I'm tired of this nonsense. She shook her head in disbelief. It's better if she's gone. I don't need her here anyway. Layla's heart sank when she heard this. She had hoped that her aunt would be more worried, but instead, she was just angry. Layla felt a lump in her throat. If her aunt found out what she had been doing, it would be even worse. Layla's body shook as she continued to watch them through the crack in the door. She could see her aunt's eyes narrowing, her face filled with frustration and bitterness. She had no idea how to get out of this. But just as she was starting to wonder what she should do next, Aunt Amina and Ali went back into the house. Layla's heart was still pounding in her chest, and her hands trembled with fear. She couldn't wait any longer. She had to get out of the hut before they came back. Taking a deep breath, Layla quietly slipped out of the hut and into the bushes. She stayed low, moving slowly so she wouldn't be heard. Her heart beat loudly in her chest, but she couldn't let fear stop her now. She had to find a way to protect the mermaid and herself. But as Layla was creeping through the bushes, she suddenly heard a sharp voice behind her. "Where do you think you're going, Layla?" Layla froze. It was Aunt Amina. She had been caught. Her aunt's voice was full of rage, and Layla turned around slowly, her body trembling. There was no way out now. She had been found. Aunt Amina's face was red with anger. She held the cane tightly in her hand, her eyes filled with fury. "Where have you been?" Aunt Amina demanded. "You think I wouldn't notice you sneaking around, huh? Answer me! Where have you been?" Layla couldn't speak. The words wouldn't come. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her throat was tight with fear, and her legs felt weak beneath her. Aunt Amina raised the cane, and before Layla could say anything, the first strike came down on her back. The pain was sharp, and Layla gasped, but she didn't dare cry out. She had learned long ago that showing weakness only made things worse. "You think you can just leave in the middle of the night? You think I wouldn't notice?" Aunt Amina's voice was cold and full of hatred as she struck again. Layla's back burned with each hit, but she stayed silent, her body shaking. She couldn't say a word. If she spoke, it would only make her aunt angrier. The cane came down again and again, each blow making Layla feel smaller, weaker, more helpless. Her body was aching, but she didn't dare try to run. She didn't know where she could go. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Aunt Amina stopped, panting with anger. She glared at Layla, her eyes filled with disgust. "Next time you think about running away, think again," Aunt Amina spat, turning her back on Layla. "You belong here, and you will do as you're told." Layla stood there, her body trembling from the pain. Tears filled her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She couldn't let her aunt see her cry. But as Aunt Amina disappeared back into the house, Layla stumbled back to the old hut, her heart heavy with fear and pain. Layla sat in the old hut crying quietly as pain from her aunt's beating surged through her body. The mermaid, who had been lying quietly beside her, gently touched Layla's shoulder. "I'm so sorry you had to go through all of that because of me," the mermaid whispered softly. Layla shook her head, tears still running down her cheeks. "It's not your fault," she whispered back. But deep down, she felt the weight of her actions. She had gotten herself into something bigger than she could handle. Suddenly, the door of the hut creaked open, and Layla froze. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her breath caught in her throat. She quickly wiped her tears away and tried to hide her face, but it was too late. Ali, Aunt Amina's son, stepped inside, rubbing his eyes as he looked around the dimly lit hut. He had no idea what he was about to see. When his eyes finally landed on the mermaid, his jaw dropped and he gasped loudly, nearly passing out from shock. His body trembled and he stumbled backward, his eyes wide with fear. Layla's heart skipped a beat as she saw the shock in his face. She quickly ran over to him and grabbed his shirt, holding onto him tightly. "Please, Ali," she begged, her voice trembling. "Don't tell your mother. Please, I beg you. You can't tell her about the mermaid." "Let's be." Ali stood frozen for a moment, still staring at the mermaid with wide eyes. He was shaking, clearly terrified. How could there be a real mermaid sitting right in front of him? How had it come here? "A mermaid," he whispered, his voice shaking. "How did she get here? How?" Layla's eyes filled with tears again. She didn't know how to explain everything, but she had to try. She took a deep breath and spoke slowly. "I found her by the river," Layla explained. "The men were after her, and I couldn't just leave her there. She's been running away from them." Ali took a step closer, his face full of confusion and curiosity. "But why didn't she just escape into the river when the men were after her?" he asked, his voice shaking. Layla turned to look at the mermaid, who seemed to be growing weaker as she lay on the floor. The mermaid's eyes met hers, and she sighed softly. "I was chased away from home," the mermaid said softly. "I refused to marry the prince, and his father, the king, became angry. He forced me to leave my home, and I've been running ever since." Layla and Ali both stared at her in surprise. "Why didn't you want to marry him?" Ali asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. The mermaid looked at him with a pained expression. "If I must marry him, I will have to stay in the palace forever. And I'm someone who likes to visit different places, see the world. I swore I would never marry him. I can't stay there. So now I guess I'll just have to return and marry him." Layla's heart sank as she listened to the mermaid's story. She couldn't understand why anyone would force someone into a marriage they didn't want. The mermaid had a right to be free, to make her own choices. But it seemed like there was no way to escape her fate. "Please," the mermaid said, her voice weak, "can you help me get back home? I don't know how to get there on my own." Layla felt conflicted. She had already risked so much for the mermaid, and now she was asking for even more help. Layla was scared. What if helping the mermaid led to even more trouble? But then she thought of the pain the mermaid was in and how much she had suffered. How could she turn her back on someone who needed her? Ali turned to Layla, his face filled with uncertainty. He wasn't sure what to do either, but he knew one thing. They had to make a decision. "If we help you," Ali asked, looking at the mermaid, "what will you give us?" The mermaid's eyes glistened with gratitude. "I will give you whatever you want. Anything. Just please help me get back home." Layla's heart was heavy with fear, but she knew they had to do something. "Please don't tell your mother, Ali," she said, tears streaming down her face. "She will never forgive me if she finds out." Ali looked at Layla for a moment, then nodded. "I swear I won't tell her, but I'll help you get her home." That night, as the moon hung high in the sky, Ali and Layla carried the mermaid out of the old hut. They moved quietly, trying not to wake anyone. It was a dangerous task, but they were determined to help the mermaid. They crept down the narrow path to the river, careful to avoid any noise. The water was calm, shimmering in the moonlight. Layla's heart beat faster as they approached the water. She knew they had to be quick. They gently lowered the mermaid into the river. The mermaid looked up at them, her eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "I'll never forget what you've done for me." Ali nodded, but his face was filled with confusion. "What about our promises?" he asked. "What will you give us?" The mermaid smiled softly, her tail splashing in the water. But before she could say anything else, she began to swim away, her form disappearing into the night. Layla and Ali stood there, staring after her. They were both shocked. She had left without fulfilling her promise. Ali's anger flared. He clenched his fists and turned to Layla. "I'm going home to tell my mother everything," he said angrily. Layla panicked, running after him in the dark. "No, please don't. I'm begging you." But it was too late. As they reached the hut, Ali entered his mother's house and suddenly screamed. Layla was terrified. She didn't know why Ali had screamed, but she knew she had to hide. She ran to the old hut and quickly closed the door behind her. Her heart was pounding in her chest. When she turned around, she noticed a small wooden box sitting in the corner of the room. She walked over to it slowly, her heart beating faster. She opened the box, trembling with fear. Inside, she found precious stones and beads, beautiful, colorful jewels that sparkled in the dim light. Then, Layla noticed something familiar. In the corner of the box, there was a bead. It was the same bead the mermaid had worn around her neck. Layla's heart skipped a beat. She knew it was from the mermaid. She picked up the box, her hands shaking. She had no idea what to do, but she knew one thing. She couldn't stay here anymore. This place, this life, it wasn't for her. Layla grabbed the box and ran far away from her aunt's house, far from the village. She found a quiet spot and built a home for herself after selling some of the precious stones. With the precious stones and beads, she was able to live comfortably, and for the first time in her life, she felt free. She lived peacefully in her new home, far from her aunt, far from the pain. Layla never forgot the mermaid, but she knew that by helping her, she had found her own freedom. And that was the greatest gift of all.